Date famous people who seriously let themselves go. Some stars seemed almost untouchable at their peak, young, glamorous, and everywhere. Years later, many looked so different that fans barely recognized them. But behind those transformations were addiction, illness, injuries, and private struggles the cameras never showed. Subscribe to Hollywood Legends Remembered as we uncover what really happened. Brendan Fraser. Brendan Fraser was once the physical image of a 1990s Hollywood action star. In George of the Jungle and The Mummy, he was lean, athletic, and constantly performing demanding stunts. Years later, when his appearance became heavier and more tired, tabloids treated the change almost like a punchline. The real story was far more serious. Fraser has explained that years of stunt work left his body badly damaged. By the time he was making the third Mummy film, he said he was using ice packs and supports just to get through production. Over roughly 7 years, he underwent multiple procedures, including a partial knee replacement, spinal surgery, and work on his vocal cords. What happens when the body that helped make you famous can no longer survive the punishment that fame demanded? Physical pain was only part of it. Fraser also went through a difficult divorce and later said he became depressed after an alleged 2003 sexual assault by former Hollywood Foreign Press Association president Philip Burke, an allegation Burke disputed. Fraser said the experience contributed to his withdrawal from Hollywood. His changing appearance therefore reflected something much larger than simple weight gain or aging. After years away from major leading roles, Fraser returned with The Whale, earning extraordinary acclaim and winning the 2023 Academy Award for Best Actor. By 2026, Fraser rejected the idea that he had simply come back, saying he never truly disappeared. His transformation tells a different story. Behind the photographs people mocked was an actor dealing with injuries, trauma, and a career he eventually rebuilt. Edward Furlong. Edward Furlong became an overnight star at 13 when James Cameron cast him as John Connor in Terminator 2: Judgment Day. With his youthful face and rebellious screen presence, he looked destined for a long Hollywood career. Instead, the years that followed brought addiction arrests, lost opportunities, and a physical transformation that shocked fans who remembered him as the teenage hero. Furlong later admitted that drugs took control of his life. He used cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin and said he overdosed more than once. The damage became impossible to separate from his appearance. Years of meth use severely damaged his teeth, which he later had replaced. How does someone recover when the face in the mirror has become a reminder of everything addiction has taken away? One of the biggest consequences came with Terminator 3. Furlong said he had signed a multi-million-dollar contract to return as John Connor with a clause requiring him to stay away from drugs. He celebrated by using cocaine, suffered an overdose and seizure, and lost the role when the incident became public. His career never returned to the trajectory many predicted after Terminator 2, although he continued acting in smaller productions. The story eventually changed direction. In 2022, Furlong said he had been sober for 4 years and was rebuilding his health and professional relationships. In 2025, he publicly marked 7 years of sobriety. Furlong's transformation was not simply about getting older. It reflected decades of addiction consequences and finally the difficult work of recovery. Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry's transformation was visible to millions long before most viewers understood what was happening. As Chandler Bing on Friends, he could look healthy in one season, painfully thin in another, and noticeably heavier later. Perry eventually explained that those changes were not simply aging or neglect. They tracked years of addiction. In his 2022 memoir, Perry wrote that his weight fluctuated between about 128 and 225 pounds while making Friends. He said being very thin often meant pills, while heavier periods reflected alcohol use. At one point during the show, he was taking as many as 55 Vicodin a day. Although he said he was never high while filming, he was sometimes sick or hungover, and his co-stars eventually realized something was wrong. How frightening would it be to watch an old episode of yourself and immediately recognize just from your face and body which addiction controlled you at the time? Perry spent decades cycling through treatment, detox, relapse, and recovery. At 49, opioid use contributed to a gastrointestinal perforation that nearly killed him, leaving him hospitalized for months and requiring multiple surgeries. By 2022, he chose to describe these experiences publicly because he wanted his story to help people struggling with addiction. Perry died on October 28, 2023, at age 54. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner ruled his death accidental, caused primarily by the acute effects of ketamine, with drowning, coronary artery disease, and buprenorphine contributing. His changing appearance was therefore never the real story. It was the visible evidence of a private illness he spent much of his adult life trying to survive again and again. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston spent the 1980s and early 1990s looking almost untouchable, glamorous, athletic, and powered by one of the most celebrated voices in pop music. By the early 2000s, however, fans were alarmed by how thin and exhausted she appeared. Her appearance at a 2001 Michael Jackson tribute concert was especially startling, prompting widespread concern about her health. Houston eventually addressed the speculation herself. In a 2002 interview with Diane Sawyer, she acknowledged that alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and prescription drugs had all been part of her life at different times. Behind the tabloid photographs was a much more serious struggle with addiction pressure and an increasingly unstable private life. How does someone who seems to have everything lose control while the entire world watches every change in her face and body? Houston continued trying to recover. She entered treatment, divorced Bobby Brown in 2007, and returned to recording with the 2009 album I Look to You. The comeback showed that her star power remained, but years of substance abuse had affected both her health and the voice audiences remembered. On February 11, 2012, Houston was found submerged in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. She was 48. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. Whitney Houston's transformation was never simply about aging or appearance. The physical changes fans noticed were outward signs of a long battle that unfolded under extraordinary public scrutiny, and one that ultimately ended in tragedy. Her fame could not shield her forever. Macaulay Culkin. Macaulay Culkin became one of the most recognizable child stars after Home Alone turned him into a global phenomenon. But by the early 2010s, photographs of the child actor looking extremely thin triggered headlines claiming that his life had spiraled out of control. The reality was more complicated. Culkin stepped away from acting in 1994 after years of childhood fame, later describing his desire to live normally. In 2004, he was arrested in Oklahoma on misdemeanor drug possession charges involving marijuana and prescription medication. Years later, tabloid stories went much further. When gaunt photographs appeared in 2012, some outlets alleged that he was addicted to heroin and oxycodone. How strange must it be to see millions of people decide what is happening in your private life simply from a handful of photographs? Culkin rejected the most extreme claims. In a 2016 interview with The Guardian, he denied reports that he had been spending thousands of dollars each month on heroin and criticized tabloids for presenting speculation as concern. Over time, the public image shifted again. Culkin returned to acting, selectively began a relationship with actress Brenda Song in 2017, and became a father of two. In 2023, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame with his family beside him. His story is less a simple collapse than a reminder that dramatic photographs can hide a deeply complicated reality. Diego Maradona. Diego Maradona once had the compact, explosive physique that helped make him one of football's greatest players. In 1986, he carried Argentina to World Cup glory, but after his peak years, addiction, weight gain, and health problems transformed both his body and the public image surrounding him. Maradona's struggle with cocaine became impossible to separate from his career. In 1991, while playing for Napoli, he received a 15-month ban after testing positive for cocaine. 3 years later, his final World Cup ended abruptly when he tested positive for ephedrine. After retiring in 1997, the structure of professional football disappeared while his battles with alcohol, weight, and health continued. How does an athlete who once seemed physically unstoppable adjust when the discipline that defined his entire life is suddenly gone? By the early 2000s, Maradona's weight had become a serious medical concern. He underwent gastric bypass surgery in 2005, then required another procedure in 2015 after regaining weight and developing complications. He also experienced several health scares, including heart and respiratory problems. Yet Maradona never completely left football. He coached Argentina at the 2010 World Cup and later managed clubs in the Middle East, Mexico, and Argentina. In November 2020, shortly after surgery for a blood clot on his brain, Maradona died at 60. An autopsy found acute pulmonary edema caused by worsening chronic heart failure with dilated cardiomyopathy. His physical transformation was dramatic, but it reflected something deeper: decades of addiction, medical problems, and a turbulent life after sporting success. Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay Lohan became one of Hollywood's most famous stars before her 20s were over. After breaking through in The Parent Trap, Freaky Friday, and Mean Girls, she seemed positioned for a long career. Instead, by 2007, her name was increasingly tied to arrests, rehab court appearances, and tabloid photographs documenting a change in her public image. That year, Lohan was arrested twice on DUI-related incidents, and police found small amounts of cocaine. She later pleaded to misdemeanor charges. Over the following years, legal problems and repeated treatment stays overshadowed her acting work. In a 2013 interview with Oprah Winfrey, Lohan acknowledged that alcohol had been her primary addiction and said she had also used cocaine. How difficult must it be to rebuild your life when every relapse court date and exhausted photograph becomes entertainment for millions? For a time, Lohan seemed trapped inside that cycle. Her career slowed, and the confident teenager audiences remembered from Mean Girls was replaced by headlines about addiction and instability. But that was not where her story ended. Lohan eventually moved away from Los Angeles, settled in Dubai, married Bader Shammas, and became a mother in 2023. She gradually returned to acting through Netflix films before reprising Anna Coleman in Disney's 2025 sequel, Freakier Friday. Her transformation is therefore not simply about letting herself go. It is also about surviving addiction, public humiliation, and legal trouble, then rebuilding her life and career on different terms. Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke was one of Hollywood's distinctive leading men in the 1980s. Films such as 9½ Weeks, Angel Heart, and Barfly made his rugged face part of his appeal. But when Rourke stepped away from acting and returned to boxing in the early 1990s, the decision changed both his career and appearance. Rourke had boxed as a teenager before becoming an actor, and he turned professional when his Hollywood career was declining. He finished that run unbeaten with 6 victories and 2 draws, but the punishment was severe. Rourke later said his nose was broken twice, his cheekbone was smashed, and repeated injuries required reconstructive surgery. He also admitted that some surgical work did not go as planned. How far would you go to chase an old dream if achieving it meant losing the face that helped make you famous? By the time Rourke returned to acting, he looked dramatically different from the star audiences remembered. His altered appearance became tabloid material, often reduced to speculation about cosmetic surgery, while overlooking the boxing damage behind it. Then came a second act. His performance as aging wrestler, Randy the Ram Robinson in Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler earned Rourke an Academy Award nomination and a Golden Globe in 2009. Rourke's transformation was more complicated than simply letting himself go. Boxing injuries, reconstructive procedures, and years of turmoil left visible marks. The same changed face, mocked by Hollywood, eventually became central to the performance that restored his reputation. Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. was one of Hollywood's gifted actors when addiction began pulling his life apart. By the mid-1990s, the polished star of Chaplin had become a subject of arrest reports, courtroom appearances, and photographs that showed how far his private life had deteriorated. In 1996, Downey was arrested after police found heroin, cocaine, and an unloaded handgun in his vehicle. Repeated probation violations followed. In 1999, a judge sentenced him to 3 years in California State Prison. He served about a year before being released. Even a celebrated return on Ally McBeal collapsed after another drug arrest and producers fired him. How do you rebuild a career when studios no longer know whether you will finish a production or end up back in jail. Downey later said recovery required a firm decision to stop using drugs. After rehabilitation, he slowly returned through films such as The Singing Detective, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and Zodiac. The turning point came with Iron Man in 2008. Casting him was considered a risk, but the film transformed him into one of Hollywood's biggest stars. His comeback went beyond commercial success. In 2024, Downey won his first Academy Award for playing Louis Strauss in Oppenheimer. The contrast is extraordinary. The actor, once considered difficult to insure because of addiction and arrests, rebuilt his health and reputation. His story is not simply about appearance. It is about how addiction nearly erased a career that later became one of Hollywood's greatest recoveries. Yasmine Bleeth. Yasmine Bleeth became one of the defining faces of Baywatch in the 1990s, playing Caroline Holden at the height of the show's popularity. With her glamorous image, she was regularly featured on sexiest women lists. But behind that image, Bleeth later revealed that cocaine addiction had begun taking over her life. In 2001, the problem became impossible to hide. Bleeth crashed her car in Michigan while under the influence, and police later found cocaine. She pleaded guilty to cocaine possession and driving while impaired, receiving probation and community service. In a 2003 essay for Glamour, she described a 5-year battle with cocaine and said she had gone days without sleep during the worst periods of her addiction. How quickly can Hollywood's image of perfection disappear when addiction begins controlling the person behind it? Bleeth entered rehabilitation and stepped away from acting. Her screen appearances became rare, and unlike many television stars, she did not pursue a comeback. Over time, photographs drew attention because she looked different from the Baywatch image audiences remembered. But those pictures told only part of the story. By 2026, Bleeth remained outside the Hollywood spotlight. Her transformation was not simply a case of someone letting herself go. It followed addiction, legal trouble, recovery, and a deliberate retreat from an industry that had once made her one of television's most recognizable women. The contrast is dramatic, but the real story is what happened after the cameras stopped. Bam Margera. Bam Margera became famous as the skateboarder and chaos-loving star of Jackass and Viva La Bam. During the 2000s, he built an image around dangerous stunts, partying, and endless energy. Years later, his physical transformation became impossible to miss, and Margera openly connected much of it to alcohol abuse and instability. Margera has said his drinking worsened after the 2011 death of his friend and Jackass co-star Ryan Dunn. By 2013, he recalled a doctor warned that alcohol abuse had badly damaged his legs and that skating might no longer be realistic. Instead of stopping, Margera said he drank even more after losing hope. How far can someone fall when the lifestyle that made them famous becomes the same lifestyle destroying their health? The following decade brought rehab stays, legal trouble, and health problems. Margera later said he spent 3 years in treatment, and during a 2022 hospitalization was placed on life support while suffering from COVID pneumonia and multiple seizures. Eventually, he decided he had to change. By 2025, Margera had returned to skateboarding and appeared in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4. He credited sobriety, weight loss, stretching, and renewed training with helping him skate again. His transformation is more than a shocking before and after image. It shows how years of addiction affected his body, career, and identity, and how returning to skateboarding became part of rebuilding all three. Nick Nolte. Nick Nolte was once one of Hollywood's rugged leading men, earning acclaim for films such as The Prince of Tides and Affliction, and being named People's Sexiest Man Alive in 1992. By the early 2000s, however, his hard-living reputation had overtaken much of the public conversation around his career. The turning point came in September 2002. Nolte was arrested in Malibu after police said he was driving erratically on Pacific Coast Highway. Tests later showed GHB in his system. His booking photo, wild hair, exhausted expression, disheveled appearance, became one of the most infamous celebrity mugshots of the era. How quickly can one photograph replace decades of respected work in the public's memory? 4 days after the arrest, Nolte voluntarily entered rehabilitation in Connecticut. He later pleaded no contest to driving under the influence of drugs and received probation, counseling, and drug testing. Nolte called the incident a wake-up call, explaining that addiction had begun controlling his life. The story did not end with that mugshot. Nolte continued acting, earning another Academy Award nomination for Warrior in 2012 and remaining active into his 80s. By 2026, he was still working and had no plans to retire again. His transformation was never just about looking older. It reflected addiction, public humiliation recovery, and the long aftermath of a life lived under Hollywood's spotlight. Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley entered the 1970s, still carrying the image of the lean, dangerous young man who had changed popular music. But during his final years, that image changed dramatically. His weight increased, his health deteriorated, and photographs from later concerts showed a visibly different performer from the star audiences remembered in the 1950s and 1960s. The change was not simply about overeating or getting older. Presley was struggling with serious health problems and a growing dependence on prescription medication. He was hospitalized in 1973, and accounts of his later years describe heavy use of sedatives, painkillers, stimulants, and other drugs. His personal physician later acknowledged prescribing enormous quantities of medication. How could someone who seemed almost superhuman on stage become so physically vulnerable in only a few years? Despite his worsening condition, Presley kept working. In the first half of 1977 alone, he performed dozens of concerts. His final show took place in Indianapolis on June 26th. People close to him later recalled that he was overweight and frustrated by it, yet his voice could still command an arena. 7 weeks later, on August 16, 1977, Presley died at Graceland at just 42. His death was officially associated with a cardiac event, while toxicology later revealed numerous prescription drugs in his system. Historians and medical writers have continued debating exactly how much those drugs, chronic illness, and other health problems contributed. The late Elvis is often reduced to jokes about jumpsuits and weight gain. In reality, the transformation reflected a much darker physical decline behind one of entertainment's most famous faces. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was once the embodiment of Hollywood masculinity. In A Streetcar Named Desire and The Wild One, his lean build and screen presence helped redefine the image of a leading man. Decades later, the physical contrast was enormous. By the 1990s, Brando reportedly weighed well over 300 pounds, and his size had become almost as famous as his acting. The change did not happen overnight. Brando's weight fluctuated for years, and by the late 1970s, his size was affecting how filmmakers photographed him. During Apocalypse Now, shadow and costumes helped conceal his body, while Brando's figure became part of Colonel Kurtz's presence. How does someone who once represented youthful rebellion cope when the public begins talking more about his body than his talent? Behind the transformation was a turbulent private life. Brando endured broken marriages, family conflict, and tragedy. His son Christian was imprisoned after killing Dog Drolet in 1990, and Brando's daughter Cheyenne died by suicide in 1995. During those years, reports described him as withdrawn and struggling with his health. Yet Brando remained one of cinema's most influential actors. He still continued appearing in films, including The Freshman, Don Juan DeMarco, and The Score. By the time Brando died in 2004 at 80, his appearance had changed dramatically. But reducing his later years to weight gain misses the larger story. Aging, grief, health problems, and personal turmoil had reshaped the man behind one of Hollywood's unforgettable faces. John Goodman. John Goodman spent decades playing characters whose size was part of their presence. Off-screen, however, his weight became a serious health concern. Goodman has said that at his heaviest he was approaching 400 pounds, and for years he repeatedly lost weight only to regain it. His struggle involved more than food. Goodman has spoken openly about alcoholism and how drinking affected his work mood, memory, and health. In 2007, after years of heavy drinking, he entered treatment and became sober. That decision became the starting point for a larger transformation. How difficult must it be to change habits that have followed you for decades when your body and career have both been shaped by them? Instead of chasing another rapid diet, Goodman changed gradually. He cut back on sugar, adopted healthier eating habits, worked with trainer Mackie Shilstone, exercised regularly, and focused on staying active. Over time, he lost roughly 200 pounds. By 2023, his slimmer appearance at the Monte Carlo Television Festival surprised many fans. Goodman's story moves in the opposite direction from many celebrity decline stories. He did not become unrecognizable because he let himself go. He became almost unrecognizable because he finally confronted habits that had been damaging his health for years. By 2026, Goodman had maintained the loss and remained sober, turning a struggle with weight and alcohol into one of Hollywood's most striking long-term transformations.